We're going to get started here today. On the line with me from STS, we have Leanne Jones, Addie Dolan, Emily Conrad, Melinda Offer, and Sydney Clinton. From IQVIA, we have Jean, Joe, and Melanie. So thanks everybody for joining. Here's Hank taking a snooze. This was Monday afternoon with his bottom lip and his booper. Just hanging out while I was working, and he's getting big. He's somewhere between 80 and 90 pounds, and he's such a good boy. He's at work, daycare, aka work today, and Santa's coming next Wednesday, so if he's able to get in, he's on a wait list. If he's able to get in, I'll definitely post a picture with Santa for you guys. Okay, so our agenda for today is STS important dates, updates, IQVIA updates. Melinda has some very good education on appropriate exclusions for internal mammary with polling questions, and then of course we'll go to Q&A. Here are our important dates. This is through February 10th. Today we're our monthly webinar. The user group call for December 21st is canceled. I'll be out, and that's just the week before Christmas, getting into the New Year holiday. So most people will be unavailable. So I've canceled that one. January 1st is the last day to register for virtual AQO. That's January 1st. January 4th is our monthly webinar. January 9th is tentative but highly likely date for the AQO Hot Topics webinar. This will be available to virtual and in-person registrants for AQO only. You must have registered, either attended live or registered for the virtual component, which is open, or registration's open to January 1st. It likely will be from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Central Time. And this will be live presentations, kind of live snippets of the higher rated presentations at AQO. And I don't mean rated like we rated them, 5-star ratings. I mean those that we got feedback on or had the most questions, or where Melinda and I felt that more clarification was needed. And we've asked the presenters for those sessions to come provide a quick overview and be available to answer live questions. A list of those presentations, so you all can prepare ahead of time, will be available and will be sent out to you, so you can watch those presentations ahead of this webinar. So I'll have more information in a slide for this on this one, but that right now it's planned for January 9th. January 18th is our user group call. January 28th is the last day to claim credits for AQO. You can claim credits if you attended virtual or live, whichever track you are claiming credit for. You need to watch all the videos from that entire track. If you attended the live session, and you attended all of the sessions for adult cardiac, you only need to watch the pre-recorded sessions and then claim your credit. You are able, with the virtual registration, you are able to watch all content from all tracks. Same thing with the live. If you joined us live, you have access to all of the content from all of the tracks: Intermax, PDmax, adult cardiac, congenital, and general thoracic. Adult cardiac monthly webinars, 2 p.m. on February 1st. Is everybody else hearing me too? Anybody else having problems?
No, ma'am. Everything sounds good. I'm
Okay.
replying to Charlotte in the chat.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to shut down the chat box. Just thanks, Charlotte, for letting us know. Please, anybody who has a question, please put it into the Q&A. Well, I guess we could leave the chat box open in case anybody has a problem, but any questions go into the Q&A. And then the monthly webinar for adult cardiac is February 1st, and then Harvest One 2023 closes on February 10th. This is a very quick turnaround, leaving about 6 weeks from the last OR date within this harvest period, which is December 31st, 2022. So do your best before you leave. If you're out of the office for the holiday and New Year's, do your best to get your data all cleaned up. So when you come back, you only need to focus on any new cases since you were out. This is 6 weeks. So We had to make it shorter this year due to some reporting requirements that STS has to meet the end of February. So please do your best, or mid-March, please do your best to get all your data and cleaned up as quickly as possible. And February 10th, it will not be moved. The harvest close date will not be moved. So please do your best to work through that. Harvest 2023 dates have been posted. February 10th is Harvest 1, May 19th for Harvest 2, August 18th for Harvest 3, and November 10th for Harvest 4. December training manual posted. Registration for AQO virtual closes on January 1st and claim CE credits by January 28th. The fee for most people who join us are non-members. If you're an STS member, the price is a little bit lower by $100. If you're a non-member, which most data managers are, the price is $400 for the virtual pass. You get access to all of the content. You're able to claim your continuing education credits by January 28th, and you'll be invited to the Hot Topics webinar. And I'm going to go through some questions first before handing it over to you, Joe, just to make sure that we have enough time for questions following Melinda's presentation. So we're going to do that real quick. Hold on one second. I don't know if this is what you want. Okay, how long will the live session be available for virtual folks? I believe, Emily, did you want to take that one? I believe that it's a year. It'll be through
Correct.
October.
Yes,
October
through
of
October
2023.
Exactly. October 20th, 2023.
Thank you. So the live recordings will be available until October of 2023. How will access to the Hot Topics session? How will we access the Hot Topics session? We'll send out, STS will send out an email to those who have registered with instructions on how to register for that.
It'll be a Zoom webinar similar to this.
That's right. We'll hold it on Zoom, but it will require registration, and we'll have to verify your registration for the webinar against your registration for AQO, but we're still working out all the details on that. But like Emily said, it will be a Zoom similar to this. And it will be recorded. I think we're still working, like I said, we're still working out the details. But Emily, I believe that we were planning to post that recording on the AQO platform.
Sure.
Okay, perfect. Are CEs only for the virtual session in October, or does the Hot Topics say have CE2s? The Hot Topic webinar does not have CEs. So it's just all the content that is already available on the platform, the live and the virtual, the live and the pre-recorded content, the live recorded and pre-recorded content that's available is what you'll need to watch to earn those CEs. And Pat, I think this is what you need. Your question was, please show the slide with the CEUs again. For virtual participants, are the recordings available yet for AQO? Emily, did you want to take that one?
Yes, they are, and I can put the link to the virtual platform in the chat. And I just wanted to mention that claiming CEUs for the content, we're doing it on a rolling basis. So if you watch the content now and you haven't claimed your credit yet, it will close at the end of December, and then the next claiming period will end at the end of January. And anything about accreditation is on the virtual platform. On the left-hand side, I believe it says accreditation. Click on that. There's a bunch of information about claiming CE credit there, and you can click on the link. I think it says like, click here to do your evaluation. That's where you click to claim your credit. So I just wanted to mention that as well.
Thank you. Do we need to request for Hot Topics in addition to the AQO virtual platform? No, we'll notify you when we have all of that planned out. We'll send notification out to all of our attendees, both the live and virtual attendees. The virtual AQO is $400 for non-members, $300 for STS members. It is posted on the website for AQO, and I'll show you where that's at. 1 second here. This is my webinar page. Hold on. On the STS webpage under meetings, if you I just do it this way, past courses, and then the advances in qualities and outcomes 2022. You can buy a virtual pass here, view the meeting agenda, or log in to view content and claim credit. Here's the information, and then if I don't know where the price is at, I think the price was on the previous page. Yeah, sorry. So STS members 300, non-member is 400. You could buy the virtual pass and then claim your credit after watching everything, review the meeting agenda. And then there's accreditation information here. And if you have questions about the accreditation, do they contact you, Emily, or should they contact
They can contact
CoreXL?
me and or CoreXL.
Okay, and CoreXL is the company that is handling our continuing education credits. They're the ones that accredited the presentations. We'll send you information out for the hot topics. If you've attended live, we'll send you that information out on how to register for it. There's no additional fee or anything for the hot topics if you've already registered for either the virtual or the in-person meeting. Can you please update the platform to include some way to mark the content you have watched for next year? Yeah, I have to do this over many days and it's hard to know where to restart. I think we can take that feedback back, Beth, and discuss it. I don't know if there's a way or not. By maybe marking things as favorite once you view them and then going on to the next one.
Yeah, we'll note that for next year and work with our partner that we use for the platform.
Great, thank you. How come I only received 2 hours of CE?
That doesn't seem right to me. So if you could send me an email, that would be great. And I'll put it in the, and I'll just type an answer to you right now.
Thanks, Emily. I'm sorry, I'm confused. If I register for virtual AQ and am paid, do I still need to register again for virtual hot topics? So it'll be a separate registration just for the Zoom platform to register for hot topics, just so we know who to allow in to the hot topics webinar. It'll be a more controlled environment as people join onto the calls. We'll need to accept you into the room for the webinar. So since there's no CEUs for hot topics, once I complete all the virtual AQO, I can go ahead and complete the CEU claim, correct? Yeah, that's correct, Jenny. Any idea so we're still discussing it. We're waiting for feedback. As you know, the feedback from participants comes into STS with the, when you complete your continuing education credit, that's how we get the feedback. So we're waiting for that to close January 28th. And then we'll be discussing the possibilities of the location for next year, if it'll be in person or virtual. That's still to be decided. Harvest 4 is scheduled to close on Veterans Day. Will this be an issue for anyone? I thought I checked that. Let me go back and check that, Amy, and if it is, then we may move that date. I don't like to close on any type of holiday. Thanks for letting me know. I thought Veterans Day. I'll have to check it and I'll get back to you all on that one. Thanks, Amy, for letting me know. Okay, now I'm going to hand it over to Joe for the IQVIA update. Joe.
Great, thank you, Carol. Just a couple items from us today. In our previous webinar, we had mentioned a couple items we were working on. Those were resolved in an update this past weekend on December 3rd. So SCS 8936, we had identified an issue with the results of the non-adjusted complications section within the risk-adjusted and regional reports that impacted all the procedure groups except for the CABG. But that should now be resolved and those calculations should now be updated. So check there if you haven't since this past weekend. A notification is also posted. So if you go into your notification section within the IQVIA platform, there are details there regarding what was fixed. And then 8944, the issue with the exported or printed PDF versions of the report. There were a few pages where we had some columns pushed off to the side of the page. And that has been fixed, so everything should line up the way it's expected to now. And I believe that's all we had.
Thank you, Joe. And now we're handing it over to Melinda for the education.
Hi,
You ready,
everybody.
you ready,
I'm
Melinda?
ready.
All right, everybody
Ready.
get your polling fingers ready.
So today we're going to talk about reason for no IMA. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because it's probably one of the, I'd say it's my #1 question that comes in the mailbox. And I know that if it's an unacceptable, other acceptable reason, you have to send those in. So I'm not like looking at those and figuring those in because I know those have to be sent in. But there's a lot of things in the training manual that I want to point out that's already in there, so that when you're reading your op notes and you're going through and you're trying to figure out if this is an acceptable reason or non-acceptable reason, I'm going to point out what's in the training manual first so that you know what to send to me, which are the things that aren't in the training manual. So we'll start with that. Next slide. So first of all, why is it important to use the IMA? And I also want to point out that this is also called the internal thoracic artery. Okay, so sometimes you will see in an op note, the surgeon will not even use the word IMA. He'll just call it the internal thoracic artery. So FYI. This is a reference of a great article I found online, and it talks a lot about why it's important to use the IMA. But generally speaking, bottom line is that there's a better long-term patency in the IMA versus the saphenous vein graft. So that's probably the #1 reason why it's important to use an IMA. So that's bottom line. But if you want to look at that article, it's got some other really good information in it too. Okay, so let's look at the metric first so you understand the metric. So it's the percentage of patients aged 18 years and older undergoing an isolated CABG who received an internal mammary artery graft. So first of all, it's just isolated CAB patients. So if you have a patient that's having a CAB and an aortic valve replacement and they don't use the IMA, don't worry. You can put non-acceptable and go on about your business, because those patients aren't even in the metric. This is just for isolated CAB patients. So when we look at this metric a little closer, it talks about patients that are removed from the denominator. So if the patient's had a previous CAB in a prior current admission, so if you coded prior CABG before, this patient's going to be removed from this denominator. Other reasons, if you code subclavian stenosis, or you code previous cardiac or thoracic surgery, previous mediastinal radiation, emergent or salvage procedure, no LAD disease, or other acceptable STS occlusion. All of these cases, when the coding is as such, are removed from the denominator. So the main issue here is this other non-acceptable. So non-acceptable means that those patients are going to stay in the denominator. It will be a fallout. Just want to, say that out loud. So these are the acceptable reasons. If you code other non-acceptable, which a lot of times that's going to be the case, as we go through these slides, you're going to see that. Those patients, if they're isolated CABs, those will be fallouts. Okay, next slide. Okay, so let's go over the acceptable reasons first so everybody understands what they are. Because sometimes I get questions and people are asking me, is this an other acceptable reason? And then when I read the op note, the patient has subclavian stenosis on the left subclavian, or the patient's has no bypassable LAD disease. So want to go over all the acceptable reasons so that you understand what they are. So first is subclavian stenosis. So now the key here is that the subclavian stenosis must be ipsilateral with the IMA that is being used in order to apply for this exclusion. So, for example, if you have right subclavian stenosis, and the surgeon says, "I'm not using the IMA because the patient has right subclavian stenosis, and he's grafting the left side of the heart," and he's saying, "I'm not using that Lima because of that," that's not acceptable, because the subclavian stenosis has to be on the same side as the IMA, or the grafted part of the heart. So if you're grafting the left side of the heart, you're wanting to use the left IMA, in order for that exclusion to be acceptable, the stenosis of that subclavian has to be on the left. Okay, so that's kind of a key to that one. The second acceptable reason is previous cardiac or thoracic surgery. Now, previous cardiac, that's pretty easy. That's pretty easy to define. However, when you are talking about thoracic surgery, prior thoracic surgery has to be ipsilateral to the IMA being considered for use. So it's again the same kind of concepts as subclavian stenosis. If you're using the Lima to go to the LAD, or you want to use that, that's what you should be using, and you've had a prior thoracic surgery in that left side of your chest, then yes, you can use that as an exemption for not using the IMA. If the surgery is on the right side of your thoracic, you're trying to use the left IMA, you're grafting the left side of the heart, then the thoracic surgery exclusion doesn't apply. Okay, so these are just some little caveats so you understand. Previous mediastinal radiation is an acceptable reason. So people who have had basically chest mantle radiation, that can cause scar tissue and vessel integrity issues. So that's an acceptable reason not to use an IMA. Emergent or salvage procedure is another acceptable reason. And I want to mention this, talk to this just briefly. So patients going into the OR, emergently or salvage, can be excluded, right? It's acceptable reason for not using the IMA. They didn't have time to harvest it. The other situation is you get the patient in the operating room, and prior to harvesting that IMA, something bad happens. The patient may arrest, and then the surgeon says, "Oh, wow, I don't have time to harvest this IMA." And so he goes on and just harvests the vein graft because he needs to get the chest open. So that also counts as an acceptable reason for not using the IMA. And then we talk about no bypassable LAD disease. I get this question a lot. So when you read in the training manual what this is first of all, it's two components. There's no hemodynamically significant left main. So that means your left main is less than 50%, or your LAD is less than 70%. So, and this is, when it's talking about LAD, it's talking about the LAD proper. So that's the main LAD. It's not the diagonals coming off the LAD. It's the LAD proper. So if you don't have any hemodynamically significant left main disease or LAD proper disease, that's an acceptable reason. The second part of this definition of no bypassable LAD disease has to do with, is the LAD system not graftable? So for example, the LAD system may be severely diseased. However, the surgeon gets in there and it's either so intracardiac or intramyocardial that he can't bypass it, or it's so distal that there's nowhere to bypass it. So in effect, he wanted to bypass that LAD system, but he couldn't. it technically wasn't possible. So in that sense, you can code no bypassable LAD disease for not using the IMA if there is no graft passed to that LAD system because it wasn't graftable.
Melinda, thank you so much. I know we're going to move on here, but I have, before we get off this slide, I have 2 questions that I wanted to ask you.
Okay.
The first one is something you had said on the emergent salvage procedure. The
Mhm.
patient, and we're talking about 2 different fields here. This field is the acceptable reasons for no internal mammary.
Correct.
And there's a choice there that's emergent or salvage procedure. And I just, could you clarify just for me, the part where the patient comes into the OR and they receive anesthesia and they code, and it becomes an emergent case for that surgeon. It becomes emergent for that surgeon to get into the chest and do the bypass as soon as possible. How is that same scenario? How does it impact the other where we're coding the status of the case, the status?
It doesn't impact it at all. The
Okay,
status of the patient, that's sequence 1975, is the status that the patient enters the operating room in. Okay,
so what I guess what I'm getting at is that you could code emergent or salvage as an acceptable reason for no IMA, even though the status would not be coded as emergent or salvage in that situation.
correct.
Okay,
If an event happens in the OR, prior to the harvest of the IMA, that makes the harvest unsafe to do. The patient has arrested or something, and the surgeon just needs to quickly get into that chest, then you can use emergent or salvage as an acceptable reason for not using that IMA.
right. Thank you. That's perfect. And then I just wanted to ask this question before we move on to the next slide, and then we'll cover the other questions later. When you say no LAD disease, you're saying no occlusive disease, correct? Example, 50%, but non-flow limiting. What if the surgeon says non-obstructive / non-flow limiting, but the cardiologist says obstructed?
Well, when you look at no bypassable disease, you have to look at our definition here. There's no hemodynamically significant left main, which would mean less than 50%, or LAD proper less than 70. So that's what I'm going. That's what you guys should be looking at when you're determining no bypassable LAD disease. Does that make sense, Carol?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Okay, and then just one more clarification. I think we'll cover these. We'll cover the next 3 questions regarding salvage. If they are coding according to definition and intent clarification, coding the status question is at sequence 1975. Coding the status question as emergent or salvage, is it appropriate according to the definition? Right, the patient's on the ECMO, or they're on hemodynamically unstable, receiving drips and things like that. Are those patients also considered emergent or salvage for the reason of not using IMA? So
yeah, they
okay.
are. Because
Perfect.
I mean, in that situation, the surgeon may want to get in as quickly as possible, and it takes quite a bit of extra time to harvest the IMA. And so that's why those types of procedures are acceptable reasons for not using an IMA.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, ready? Going
All
on.
right, ready. We're going on. Now we're going to talk about other acceptable STS provided exclusion. Now remember, this one is still this is one of the exclusions in the metric. So this is a category that first of all, I want to say, if you choose to code this category, so this has to be adjudicated by surgeon leadership and deemed to be acceptable. Unless there are specific instructions in the training manual, because the specific instructions and examples that are in the training manual under this particular exclusion that we're talking about, the other acceptable, have already been approved by surgeon leadership. Okay, so that means I don't have to take it to them anymore. That's in the training manual. So let's go first of all and see what's in the training manual for other acceptable STS provided exclusions. So the first one, we have a left upper extremity fistula for hemodialysis, and there's a concern over coronary still syndrome. So if you've got a left upper extremity fistula for hemodialysis, the surgeon is concerned that there might be some issue with that and the use of the IMA, then that's other acceptable. Another example we have is severe peripheral vascular disease, and the lower extremities perfusions are supplied by the mammaries. I mean, you certainly wouldn't want to use a mammary if the entire lower system of the body was supplied by the mammary. So that's an acceptable reason. Bilateral mastectomies, where both the rima and the lima are harvested. How could you use an IMA if you don't even have one? Okay. And then the patient that has a pectus, that is a severe pectus, and the deformity is such that the surgeon cannot harvest the IMA. So these four here have already been adjudicated. So if you come across a patient like that, you can just say you can use other acceptable because they've been adjudicated already. If you have other situations that you think are other acceptable, and they're not only not acceptable, which we're going to talk about next list, then you can send those in and the surgeons will review those and adjudicate those. This is an audit field, and I just wanted to point that out. So if you are coding other acceptable STS provided exclusion, you either need to have something in the training manual that says it's acceptable, or you have to have a little email from me that says this is reviewed and this is deemed acceptable in the event of an audit. Okay. Next. All right, so now let's talk about the non-acceptable STS exclusion. This is the one where it's the fallout. This is metric failure, whatever you want to call it. And we have lots of examples in the training manual of other non-acceptable exclusions. These have all been adjudicated by surgeon leadership too. So let's look at the examples in the training manual. The IMA is not used related to poor or low blood flow or small size. So if you're reading a note and he says he didn't use it because he had poor blood flow or a small IMA, automatically that's not acceptable. Okay, it's there, it's already been adjudicated in the training manual. Number two, the IMA is harvested and there is trauma to the vessel during the harvest. Oops, didn't mean for that to happen, but it's not an acceptable exclusion. If the IMA gets dissected, cut, traumatized, whatever, during the harvest, that's a non-acceptable STS exclusion. Number three, the IMA harvest is difficult due to trauma, current or recent, such as rib fractures or scar tissue. Early in this version, we allowed some recent trauma, but since I can't remember exactly when I updated this, I think it's May or April of this past year, a decision came down from surgeon leadership and no trauma. So if you've had recent trauma, old trauma, and though that trauma is making it difficult to harvest the IMA, it's not acceptable. The next example is a patient that has severe COPD and emphysema with hyperinflated lungs. That's not acceptable reason for not using an IMA. And then the last one that's in the training manual for not acceptable is a left main disease without LAD disease. Okay, so because what the surgeons say is left main is functionally two vessel disease, you know, your LAD and your CERT, because your left main bifurcates into your LAD and your circ. So you can't use no bypassable LAD disease if you got left main disease, and you can't use other acceptable if you got left main disease. Okay. So I think next we're going to go into the scenarios, and hopefully that will help you understand a little bit more about the IMA.
Okay, I had two questions. Two questions before we do that, just to help people with the questions that you're going to ask them. First one is, LAD was not graftable, so saphenous vein was used with the diagonal. Can no bypassable LAD be abstracted as yes?
Well, if the LAD was not graftable, so technically the surgeon could not bypass that LAD proper, then yes.
And can you explain what the LAD proper is?
Okay, so when you look at the LAD, first of all, the LAD is a system, right? It's one of the vessel systems. You've got three systems. You got your LAD system, you got your circumflex system, and you got your RCA system. So the LAD system has what I call the LAD proper. That's your main left and anterior descending artery going down, so left side. And coming off of that LAD proper are the diagonals. That's part of the LAD distribution, but it's not your LAD proper. So if you look at a picture, you can, Carol's trying to get a picture of, actually in the training manual, I think we have a pretty good picture of the LAD distribution and system. But yeah, this doesn't really show the diagonals coming off. Oh, there it is. So see how you've got your LAD running down, the picture on the bottom, Carol, down below. So you've got your LAD running down. So that's the LAD proper, that thing running down. And see those little branches coming off the side, those are your diagonals. So the diagonals are part of the LAD system, but they're not the LAD proper, which is that one run down. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I hope it
Okay.
makes sense. Okay. All right. Ready for some questions? And then I think we can cover these next two at the end. You may cover this. Okay.
All right. Question number 1. I attempted to harvest the lima, but due to severe fibrotic tissue, it was impossible to harvest without injury to the vessel. After 2 injuries of the lima, use of the lima was aborted. So is this other acceptable reason or non-acceptable? So this was a traumatized lima, per the surgeon. I can't see the polls running. Is it running?
Oh, hold on. Wait 1 second, Melinda. Sorry. Let me fix this. Now you can see it. Right?
Yeah, I can see it now.
Okay.
All right, looks like everybody's doing pretty good with this.
Okay, I'm going to end it. I think we
Yep, we can
We
end
got
it.
a lot
So
of-
it's
yeah.
about a 90-10 split. So 90% of the people said this is other non-acceptable reason. And that is the answer. Okay, so this is a IMA that was harvested and there was trauma to the vessel. Okay, the surgeon clearly tells you he injured this vessel 2 times. That is not an acceptable reason for not using the IMA. It may be a technical reason for not using the IMA, but it's not acceptable per surgeon leadership for not using the IMA because it was injured. And remember, you got 2 IMAs. Let's think about that too. You've got a RIMA and a LIMA. Okay. All right. Question number 2. So your left main is free of disease. Your LAD has 40% stenosis. Your diagonal has 90% stenosis. A cabbage times SVG times 1 SVG to diagonal was done. What do I put for the reason for no IMA? So do I say other acceptable, no LAD disease, or other non-acceptable?
I think you taught pretty well on this one.
Yeah, that's good to see.
Yeah. Okay, let it go for a few more seconds here. I'm just gonna, I think we have a pretty good representation of
Yep.
everybody. Okay.
Okay, so, and the answer is no LAD disease. So let's talk about this one just a little bit. So you don't have left main disease. Your LAD proper is only 40%. Your diagonal's 90, but your diagonal is not the LAD proper. It's that little, it's in the distribution, but it's not the LAD proper. So the reason here is no LAD disease. There's no LAD proper disease in this patient. And there's no left main disease. Because if you look at the definition for no bypassable left main or LAD disease, it's left main less than 50, LAD proper, keep that in your mind, LAD proper less than 70%. So all you had here was a diagonal, and using SVG to the diagonal is perfectly normal thing to do, and you can code this as no LAD disease. Now, the reason you wouldn't code this as other acceptable is because there's a choice for no LAD disease. So when you're looking at your data collection form, you know, we have specific choices laid out. So if your reason is one of those choices listed, like subclavian stenosis or no LAD disease or emergency or, you know, prior surgery, you pick that choice. The only time we go to other acceptable reason is if the choice isn't there. Okay, because I get a lot of questions like this. So this is a perfect example of a question that I get. And they want the data managers want to code other acceptable reason, but the best choice is the choice you have for no LAD disease in this particular situation. Okay.
And then this goes along with one of the questions that came in from Sharina. It says, I thought no LAD disease was less than 50%. Did this change?
I think that she's thinking about
Left
how
main.
you coding of vessel stenosis versus the definition for no bypassable left main disease. Because if you're counting, if you're looking to code 1170 or that distribution stenosis, 50% is going to count as disease. But when you're looking at IMA reasons, the stenosis is a bit different because most people don't bypass 50% lesions. Okay. And I think that's why the language in the no LAD reason for the IMA is different from counting number of vessels, disease, and stenosis in the diseased vessels.
Thank you.
So question number 3. The lima was harvested. The flow in the IMA was pathetic. It was a small vessel. The IMA was discarded and not used for conduit. So is this other acceptable or other non-acceptable?
And Melinda, I think you did another great job educating on this one.
Yeah, this one's good. People are doing really good with this one.
And okay, I'm going to
Alright.
stop it there.
Okay. And the answer is other, not acceptable. So remember, in the training manual, it says if your IMA is not used because of poor flow or because it's too small, it's other, not acceptable. I mean, the surgeon's real clear here. The flow was pathetic and it was a small vessel. That's not acceptable reason for not using the IMA.
And then this is a question that comes from Teresa that goes along with this. Why would it not be okay to use a vessel that has poor flow? And I don't think it's, I think what our surgeons were saying here, Melinda, and I think you covered this in one of the earlier slides, is that they're not saying that it's clinically not the right thing to do for the patient, but that when they looked at data across all sites for reasons for not using the internal mammary, there was no difference at any one center. So they felt that this happens equally across the centers where they have to code not acceptable. Do you have anything to add to that?
Well, yeah, the other part is, what's a small vessel? A small vessel to one surgeon might be not a small vessel to another surgeon. Or, did they try to improve flow with nitroglycerin? I mean, so these really surgeons' subjective things tend to be non-acceptable because they're so subjective versus something that's clearly very objective and they've got no LAD disease or LAD that can't be bypassed, or they've got left subclavian stenosis. So try to think of it in your mind that way too. Because like the surgeons say, well, hey, he might think that's a small vessel. I think that's a fine vessel. Right?
So if a patient had an left internal mammary artery harvested but not used, we would code no for sequence 2626.
Well, yeah, if they don't leave the OR with an LAD in lima in use, then it doesn't matter if you harvested it or not. You didn't use it. It's not in the patient's. It's not used in the grafting of the patient. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Okay, question 4, and I'll get to your statements about establish a better model. I'll get to your statement because you're not the only one who has those thoughts. So go ahead, Melinda, question 4.
Question number 4, cabbage ×1 SVG to the LAD. The surgeon opts not to use the lima because it could not reach the distal third of the LAD. Here's your cath report. You've got a 70% left main and a 60% LAD. So is this no LAD disease, or this non-acceptable, or is this acceptable?
Oh boy. Uh-oh. This is a good question, Melinda.
I get it all the time. Comes in almost once, probably once a day, or once every other day.
People are nervous. They don't want to answer it.
Oh, just answer it. We can't tell who you are. That's the fun about these pollings.
Okay, I'm going to end it here. Ready?
All right, let's see what the answer is. The answer is other, not acceptable reason. Okay, so let's look at this. Well, it's definitely not no LAD disease because it's got a left main of 70% and is LAD. If you look at that definition of no bypassable LAD disease, it says left main. Okay, so no left main. It's got to be less than 70 and your LAD's got to be less than 70. So it's 2 parts.
Left main less than 50.
50 and LAD less than 70. So it's 2 parts. So if you look back at this slide, your LAD was 70%. So this patient doesn't count for no LAD disease because clearly he does have, because he has left main of 70, which is functionally LAD disease. And the surgeon said, well, this wasn't long enough. I couldn't reach it. Well, he could have done a free IMA or a composite IMA graft. Okay. You don't have to use a pedicle. You could use a composite, and put the IMA to the distal end. So the surgeons, because I've asked this numerous times, I need to put this in the training manual. The surgeons say this is not acceptable because of length, because of the main reason they could have used a IMA composite and the left main of 70% in this particular.
Can you explain for those who may be new or maybe haven't seen our the saphenous vein graft or the grafting webinars that we've done? Can you explain what a composite IMA is?
Well, that's where, like, if your IMA is not, it's like if for example, the surgeon says the IMA is not long enough. So what he could have done is he could have taken the IMA as a free graft, and then he could have attached it to a saphenous vein part 2. So you've got a graft that's part vein, part IMA, and use that.
Yeah, and
And
technically that graft functions, even though it has part vein graft, since it has internal mammary, it's going to function as an internal mammary.
Right, and it's going to count towards use as an internal mammary.
Correct. And which gets into the other question from Julia about what is the difference between IMA free versus IMA in situ.
Well, in situ means that, if you look at the anatomy of the IMA, how it's coming off, gosh, it's hard to explain it without a picture, but basically in situ means that they take the pedicle where it's coming out of the it's coming off the subclavian. They take that, they free it up, and then they just directly attach that to the distal site. Free means they go in there and they cut part of the IMA out. They're not keeping it attached in the body. They're cutting part of it out and using that to graft the section. Does that make sense, Carol? I'm trying to think.
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense. And I think we probably have some explanation if you
and we have
search in situ
pictures
in the training manual.
And we have pictures in the we do have pictures, nice pictures in the training manual of in situ IMAs. You can see how they're attached. Okay, so question number 5. Patient had sternal fracture from a motor vehicle accident in 2021. The lima was densely adherent to the chest, and so you couldn't take the lima because he couldn't harvest it.
Thank you. And the poll's running. Is this other acceptable or other non-acceptable?
I figured this one might be split a little bit because we used to allow this, and we don't allow this anymore. So,
okay,
all
here
right.
are the results.
Okay, so the answer is other non-acceptable, and this was updated in May of this year. It went all the way to the task force, basically, because we had many discussions about whether trauma, either current trauma, meaning sternal fracture from a current traumatic episode had done something to the IMA or fractured the ribs, or past trauma where you got scar tissue. And the bottom line from the task force was that no trauma is acceptable to not using the IMA. So that was updated in May this year.
And I think when we say it's, that's correct. I agree with you, Melinda. I think we just have to be careful when we say not acceptable to use the IMA, is that we're not trying to dictate how the surgeons perform their surgeries.
Right.
The surgeons need to make the decisions for themselves. And Julia, your question about they should revise this because it's not fair since it's a star metric. When Dr. D'Agostino, who was previous chair of the task force, looked at this more closely, all across all of the sites in the database, so over 1,000 sites in the database, and looked at the use of internal mammary. And when it was not used, it was actually equal across sites. There was no one site who was getting penalized. Not, I don't want to use the word penalized, but there was no one site that was falling out of this metric any more than any other site. Significantly, that was statistically significant. So it is fair when he looked at it. It actually does. It is fair when it goes into analysis, because all sites seem to be having the same type of issues regarding traumatic patients or the other non-acceptable STS reasons that we've talked about so far. And most sites, and we can look at this, I don't know if we're all able to stay on for an extra 15 minutes after we get through the rest of the questions. But I can show you on the risk-adjusted outcomes how sites are performing. And you could see that nearly all sites are at 99%, meeting this measure at 99%, if not closer. So it's very difficult to get 3 stars, and we can go over that as soon as we're done with these questions. So it is a tricky one, and that's correct. Even after CPR, the trauma, even after CPR, is not an acceptable exclusion.
Yeah, and the surgeons went round and round with this. So, but again, like Carol said, it doesn't mean that your surgeon's not doing the right thing, because he is. He's making the right decision given the situation as he sees fit. It's just that when leadership has to adjudicate all of these different requests and look at the entire database, we have to come up with some uniform, objective type decisions.
Yeah, that's good, Melinda.
That's basically what's happened here. Okay, number 6. Cabbage ×1 with the SVG to the LAD.
Oh, wait. Bonnie says back on slide answer 5. Uh-oh. Back on slide answer 5, it says, is an STS acceptable exclusion?
Yeah, it says no trauma. And then you see all the commas, is an acceptable exclusion. Just take out current, recent, all that, all the stuff between the commas, and say no trauma is an acceptable exclusion. Okay, so it's not acceptable. It's not an acceptable exclusion. I understand what you're saying. Somebody just asked me that the other day, and maybe I need to word that, but the surgeons worded that, so I'll see if I can make the wording a little clearer. Okay, question number 6. Cabbage ×1 with the SVG to the LAD. Mitral valve replacement. Cath report Lima, well, I can't read it. LF main is 50, LAD is 80. SVG used to bypass the LAD. So is this an other acceptable reason, or is this an other non-acceptable reason?
Hint, hint.
I know. Hint, hint.
Hint, hint.
Well, and this one's got a couple things going on. A lot of these have a lot of them have more than one thing going on when you read them, and you have to kind of weed through that.
Okay, I'm going to stop it there.
Okay, so we got a 75-25 split, and the answer is other non-acceptable. So, first of all, this was kind of a trick question because it doesn't matter. This is a cabbage with the mitral valve replacement. So it's not an isolated cab, okay? So you can put other non-acceptable reason all day long. It doesn't matter, you know, because it's not in the metric. This patient's not in the metric. If this
right. Yeah.
see, it's kind of
and this is
question.
the other hint. It doesn't matter, but.
And the reason I send this, the reason I do this is because I get that's why I always ask for the op note, you know, because people ask me questions and I'm like, I need to take this to the surgeon, send me the op note. That's exactly what I say. Y'all know who know me, you know, that's what I say. And I read that op note before I take it to the surgeons, because a lot of times that op note is not an isolated cab. Okay. So if it's not an isolated cab, first of all, don't worry about it. Secondly, when you look at this particular situation, this patient had LAD disease. Okay. So if the patient had not had that mitral valve replacement, and this had been an isolated cab, that LAD should have been bypassed by an IMA. So regardless, this would have been other non-acceptable reasons. Okay. So when, you know, so think about these things as you're going through these op notes when you're thinking about reasons for no IMA. And that was kind of a trick question, but I did want to point that out because I get this question all the time. And I tell people, hey, you're in luck. This is not an isolated cab. Okay, so question number 7. Left main is 70, LAD is 70. They did a cabbage. The surgeon is unable to harvest the lima due to the patient's obesity. So the SVG is placed. Acceptable or not acceptable?
I think they might get it. They might have it, Melinda.
I think so. And again, this is obesity's objective too. Let's think about it. You know, I mean, you know, what one person thinks is obese, another person might think is beautiful. I mean, so.
And I was talking about this with Leanne because she thinks her BMI is high, but I told her it's because of all her muscle.
Yeah, it is her
And
muscle
just because
mass.
you have a high BMI doesn't mean that you're obese.
Exactly. I mean, my husband thinks I'm fat, so you know. I said it's all in the eye, it's all in the eye of the beholder, right?
That's right.
Being 5'1" is a struggle.
Yeah, but you got a lot of muscle, Leanne. Okay, I'm gonna add poll. All right.
All right. So, and what's the answer here? Other non-acceptable. Okay, again, like I said, this is kind of an objective thing, you know. Like I said, what's fat, what's not fat, you know, what's too obese to be able to, it's a very subjective reason for not taking the IMA. And the surgeon may have done, like I said, done the perfectly acceptable, correct thing at the time, but overall surgeon leadership is going to say this is not acceptable over the uniform population of the whole database. All right, so I got a summary slide, I think. And a lot of this stuff we've said already, but you know, the conclusion here is IMA use is not expected to be 100%. It's not. I mean, there's always going to be situations where your surgeon is going to not use that IA for some reason, but that doesn't mean that STS sees that as an acceptable reason. Okay. In those situations, again, like we've said throughout this presentation, the surgeons made the correct decision, clinically correct decision, and they did it with due diligence at the time. However, you know, as Carol pointed out, that the leadership feels like that these events occur in a frequency where no one site is going to be impacted. And so I wanted to review this with you. I know this is important to you guys because it is a metric at this point in time. I'm not sure how long it will still be a metric in the next upgrade. I don't know, you know, they do review those things over the years, but I know it's a very competitive metric. And I'm hoping that you understand the reasonings behind the non-acceptable reasons and acceptable reasons a little bit better now.
Okay, thanks, Melinda. And quick questions. Can you define recent trauma as a non-acceptable reason for not using IMA? What time frame is needed? I think the answer here is that any trauma. They're
Yeah.
talking about a patient with a bullet lodged in the IMA area.
Yeah, that's sounds like trauma to me.
Yeah, and we do not, any trauma is a non-acceptable reason. And we
Yeah.
will provide clarification in the training manual. Thanks,
The
Beth, for
surgeons,
this suggestion.
the surgeons were they went, like I said, they went round and round with this, and the decision that came down was pretty clear, that
Yeah,
no
and I
trauma.
think Beth puts it in a good way too. She says these are exclusions from the measure. They are not coding whether the surgery was acceptable, just whether an exception to the metric is acceptable. And
Right.
I think you summarized that nice, Beth, is that STS surgeons are not trying to dictate how you perform surgery, even though we know that quality measures sometimes impact action. And it's true, we see that, right? We can see when the internal mammary measure started that the number of internal mammaries increased. And we can see that when we put out information about using multiple arterial grafts and the positive impact on certain populations of patients, that the use of bilateral arterial grafts increases. So what I'm saying is, to echo Beth, it's not coding whether the surgery was acceptable, but we're looking at the metric. And when we look at the fallouts to the metric, we're not seeing any one site having more fallouts than the other site related. And we're being consistent with what we're telling sites regarding trauma, regarding all of our other non-acceptable exclusions and things like that. So I thank Beth for putting that in there. Proper LAD doesn't include the diagonal branch. Is that correct, Melinda?
Right. The diagonals are in the distribution, but it's not considered, it's not the LAD proper.
In an isolated cabin, the LAD is 100%, no internal mammary is used. So I'm assuming you're saying that. I don't understand that question, Julia.
Well, if the LAD is 100% and there's no IMA, Julia, I need to see why there was no IMA use. What was the surgeon's reasoning? You can send that in to me. Was the LAD even graftable? I mean, we need more information.
Okay, Haley says, great review. Thank you so much. Great education as always, Melinda. Thank you. When was webinar about cabbage grafts? I think we reviewed it on the upgrade for version 4.20.2. When we went into pictures.
We did it another time too, but maybe I love LA. I love distributions and stuff like that. So maybe we'll.
Yeah, and you know what? Maybe one thing we can work on, Melinda, is going through the webinars and providing links in the training manual to those specific sections. Or in the training manual in those sections, providing links to the webinars that go along with them. That might be something we can do. We could try to do that.
Okay.
Yeah. Not like we have all the other great things to get done. We can, but I think it would be helpful if we could maybe at least some of them, like this one, the PROC ID chart, we can maybe link to in the front, things like that. So
yeah, we could talk. You and I can talk about that on our next call and figure out how we can do that. Okay.
Ooh, I think people would like that too. And another webinar to revisit the grafts and T-grafts, so we can talk about that. Stacy says, if a patient has no LAD disease, meaning the left main is not the left main less than 50 or LAD less than 70, but saphenous vein grafts are used to the distal LAD and circ because those were the only viable vessels, is that coded as no LAD disease?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. That one, I would definitely need to see the op note and how things were written, because that's a real tricky one, Stacy.
Yeah. And Erica, just so you know, the webinar's in the descriptions. I tried to have our marketing team add what the educational topic was. So if you look at the descriptions on the YouTube channel, you might be able to see it, at least in the meantime, until we're able to try to work out another better solution for that. Okay, real quick, I want to show this, if I can get logged in.
Yeah, I have a few more minutes and I have another call.
Okay,
at 1:30.
hopefully it will only go just a few minutes here, but I just want to show people often, I get a lot of emails, especially after the star ratings come out, about why sites are not receiving 3 stars. And for the internal mammary when they were at 100% or 99% or whatever it may be. So I just want to show this quickly. This is the Harvest 3 report. And I just want to show how heavily met this metric is. And oftentimes when metrics are tapped out like this, NQF will want to retire them because similar to the SCIP metric, if you all were around in the early 2000s when the surgical metric came out regarding antibiotics and compression stockings and all of those things, everybody started meeting it, NQF retired it, and then they entered other measures like the antibiotic measures as separate measures and things like that. We do have representation on the NQF panel for reviewing measures. And the thought at this time is that if we retire is that this measure is so important to the outcome of cardiac surgery patients that retiring it might be harmful because sites or physicians maybe no longer will try to do their best to use the internal mammary in procedures, since using saphenous vein grafts can oftentimes lessen the OR time for patients. So they're very dedicated to helping this measure remain just because of the impact it has on patient outcomes and not wanting to lose that due to other influences within the hospital pressing for shorter OR times. Let me see if I can find this easier.
And I don't know if Ashley still wants to talk, but Carol, I just noticed she had her hand up. Just
Oh, okay.
FYI.
We can unmute. If you want it to unmute, Ashley, go ahead and ask your question. Okay. And so what I want to show here is, let me see if this is, am I in the right spot? Oh, this is the outcomes. That's not what I wanted.
Ashley, if you have a question, you can unmute yourself. I see your hand is up. I don't know if that's by mistake or.
Here it is. Okay. So this is the internal mammary. This is for internal mammary use. This site had a very high denominator. They scored 98%. Okay, so they did very, very amazing. Their confidence interval is somewhere between 97.08% and 98.69%. So on 98% of their cases, they met the measure of providing that patient with an internal mammary artery or had an acceptable reason where it removed the patients from the denominator. However, even though they were at 98%, they were only in the 6th percentile. You can see the 50th percentile for meeting this measure, the 50th percentile, so right in the middle of all sites, the score is 99.72% at that 50th site, or at that middle site. So you have, it is so heavy. The 90th percentile is 100% meeting that measure. So you have this, and you can see here, you can see, I don't know if I can. I would have to look at that a little bit closer, but you could see that the 50th percentile for sites is still at 99.72% of meeting the metric. So we get a lot of questions from sites about, I was at 100%, I was at 99%, I was at 98%, but why is this saying that I'm only within the 6th percentile? They're in the bottom percentile for meeting this measure, and they met it at 98% of the time. So it's a very difficult measure to meet. You have to be 100%. Even scoring 100% does not mean that you're going to be receive a 3-star rating. There's other information that goes into it, and I found it here under the library. We reviewed this before on one of the webinars, and the best I could do to explain that phenomenon is down here.
It has to do with it's not your score that they're measuring. They're measuring you against the other participants and their scores.
Yeah,
So-
that's right. And it has, if you read this section, this is a process measure. It says, where did it go?
I think it's in the star rating, Carol, because I've
No, the part for the internal mammary, I found it
You
in
did?
here where it talked about how the participant percentile. Okay, I have to read it more, but I thought I found it in here last time we were talking about it. All right, I'm gonna look for it, and I'm gonna look back up in the star rating too, but I thought it was within this. This is the statistical calculation and details for the NQF reported measures. So let me re-review that, but I'm pretty certain it was in this section. If you have it, Melinda, we can go over it on our next call on Friday. But as you can see, I guess what my point was, seeing that the distribution for the internal mammary is very heavy around 98, 99%. So one fallout, not having a larger denominator of cases, those all could be things that are impacting, as well as the outcomes that happen at other sites, with which, as you said, Melinda, is within the star rating explanation and the calculating of these. So hopefully that helps them. Okay, hold on. Totally hypothetical, if internal mammary was harvested but not used for LAD or LAD distribution, but other vessels, would that impact capturing this metric? That's a good question.
Well, if the IMA is used, oh, it says it's not used. Wait a minute, but it's used at another vessel, right?
Yeah.
Then it's used, so it counts.
Okay.
It doesn't say in the data definition, did you use the left internal mammary? It says, did you use an IMA? So you could either use the right one or the left one, as long as you use one of them.
And it doesn't matter where you use it.
Exactly.
Or use the multiple artery instead of the internal mammary as a quality comparative measure instead. Yeah, we're looking at that too. Not instead of, but in addition to, because multiple artery graphs, they're great for certain populations of patients, and they're still doing research on that regarding what patients they're best suited for. It's a big discussion that happens at the surgeon level with research and things like that, where they are going back and forth trying to figure out what population those multiple arterial grafts are good for. Where is the star rating explanation? It's in the same document, the
analysis report.
Yeah, the analysis report. And
oh, Christine says try page 31 to 32. There it is.
Oh, I thought it was down at the bottom. So performance with respect to, let's make that bigger. Performance with respect to internal mammary artery use was measured by the proportion of first-time CABG patients who received at least one internal mammary artery graft. Using a statistical model, the proportion of first-time CABG patients who received at least one IMA graft was smoothed to account for wide sampling variation that occurs at sites with small sample size. The final reported proportion is an estimate of an hypothetical quantity. It is the proportion of first-time CABG patients who would be projected to receive an IMA if the participant treated a very large number of patients. See statistical model for more details. We'll have to go through this together, Melinda, and see, because I thought there was more specific information specific to the IMA group.
I can search it out for you.
Okay, thank you. And the star rating explanation is within this document, within the National Report Overview on the IQVIA platform within the resource library.
Yeah, and it's also called analysis overview or something like that. You can find it too.
Thank you. You're welcome, Amanda. And for the surgeons who are interested in receiving their individual reports, we do have a surgeon level composite that surgeons need to consent to. It's only released to that specific surgeon, to the consenting surgeon, and you can email stsdb@sts.org for more information on that.
Christine says now it's page 36. I don't know if that makes it.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. I thought I was on that last page, second to last. Let's see, maybe I missed it. Yeah, this is it. Thank you. Although we often speak of measuring performance, the true quantities of interest relevant to performance evaluation are probabilities that cannot be observed directly. For example, when assessing mortality, we are interested in knowing the probability that a randomly selected patient with typical risk factors would survive the procedure if the patient underwent the surgery at a particular hospital. So you have a typical patient with typical risk factors, and how is that patient going to do at your hospital? When assessing IMA usage, we are interested in knowing the probability that a randomly selected CABG patient would receive an IMA graft if the patient underwent surgery at a particular hospital. Although such probabilities cannot be observed directly, they may be estimated from observed data. The precision of the resulting estimate depends directly on the number of patients available for analysis. Even with a moderately large sample of patients, the estimates are often somewhat less precise than is commonly realized. In order to maximize statistical precision, a statistical technique called, also known as hierarchical modeling, was used to estimate each participant's performance on various domains of quality. Unlike conventional methods, random effect modeling incorporates information from all peer providers, so everybody within analysis, this is known as borrowing strength, to obtain a more reliable estimate of a single provider's performance. Provider performance is specific to site performance. Provider-specific estimates are shrunken towards the mean for all providers, with the amount of shrinkage being inversely related to the number of cases. So your number of cases, and also dependent upon the relative amounts of between and within provider variation. Bayesian methodology was used to fit each random effects model. Okay. Hierarchical model to use to generate the composite quality score and participant rating must be run on the entire STS database, and that's why we have a one-run policy. So the number of patients in analysis and then how everybody else performed is what's used to determine where you fall at within the percentage percentile ranking rating for your site. I don't know if that helps at all, but this is exactly what I was looking for. That's the section I remember. Is that what you're talking about, Melinda?
That's part of the talk. That plus the star ratings kind of helps people understand it better.
Okay.